Bună seara! Sunt Ioana Buldea Constantinescu, brand manager al editurii Corin și sunt încântată în această seară să vă invit tocmai pe Marte. Metafora nu este întâmplătoare. Ne întâlnim cu un invitat absolut special. Este vorba despre Christopher Swiedler, autorul volumului În, roșu, marțian, cel pe care îl vedeți aici, apărut la Corin Junior în colecția Aventură și Mister. Hello, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hi, thank you. I'm excited.
We're excited too. We're very excited to have you as a guest and very excited to be talking about this wonderful book. And I was going to ask you, why a book about adventures on Mars? The kids totally loved it. We had a live launching here just a few days ago and everyone was so excited, but why a book about Mars?
I grew up reading science fiction. Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke was my favorite. And I don't know, I kind of always thought about writing books, but I never got super serious until I had children of my own. And then somehow that combination worked really well. Something about having kids made me think about writing stories about kids and for kids. And the thing I wanted to do, I think, was, hard science fiction is what I really loved when I was growing up, where there's some kind of real science, even if they're made up things. Also, there's some real science or math, behind it. And there's not a whole lot of that in kids' science fiction. A lot of it is more of the fun space opera, shooting laser guns and, just having those sorts of events.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, and so, what I remember when I was a kid, there are things that I learned about science from like reading science fiction books. There's like this famous story, Marooned Off Vesta, where somebody, like, they're stuck in a ship and they don't have any power or anything like that, but they have all this water in the hold, and the way they get to the asteroid that they're trying to get to is like punching a hole in the side of it, and all the water like sprays out, and that's Newton's laws, and it goes, which is just like this thing that's like, oh, it makes you think about how that stuff actually works. And so I wanted to have some ideas in a story that had that kind of reaction in kids, where it's like, oh, this is how Mars really is, or this is how this might really work, or things like that, while still having like a fun adventure, and excitement and danger and all that sort of stuff. And that's just sort of how it evolved, I guess.
This has been a 7-year adventure of writing for you, and I was very interested, which part of the journey do you find more challenging, the actual research and writing of the book, or handling things once the manuscript is actually set free into the world?
Oh, the research is fun and easy. I love like thinking, going and looking up what is the actual gravity on Mars, or what is the surface pressure, or things like that. And once it's out into the world is fun and easy. It's so exciting to see people read it and hear what they think of it. The hard part is definitely the writing and the time in between. I remember I wrote, this was the first book I ever wrote, and so I wrote one draft, and that was my goal. I want to write a draft of a book. That was my accomplishment I really wanted. And so it took me months and months and months, and I finished it. And I was like, okay, well, I did that. I guess I'll write it again, because I didn't have an idea for another book. And I was like, I can make this better. And I did that like 5 or 6 times, depending on how you want to count. And I started, going to classes. I have a mentor and teacher named Shirin. I took her, I started going to her classes, and she worked with me as an editor. And I kind of just kept writing it over and over because I didn't have a better idea for a book, and I kept thinking that I would be able to make this draft better, and so that kind of just kept going. But writing is, it's something I enjoy overall, but one thing I think most writers will tell you is that the actual typing in of the words, the act of writing, is not always an enjoyable, fun experience. It's sometimes very difficult, very, you have to just force yourself to get through certain parts. You have to get words on the page and then later make them better. It's not just like this, oh, wow, this is great, I have this idea, and now the words all flow. I think some writers are maybe like that, and the rest of us are really jealous of them. It's a lot of work, and you kind of have to, put yourself into it. But it's very rewarding as you do it. You know what I mean? Like looking back, oh, I got this done today, or I got this done this month. You know, that feeling is great. I think there's a famous quote, like, I love having written a book. I like the writing. Sometimes it's very enjoyable, but more often it's work. But overall, it's a very rewarding thing, and that's why, you know, this is why we keep doing it for years and years.
Well, thank you in the name of your readers for taking the time and for the effort. The book is totally awesome, a gem, I would say, in terms of children's literature. We totally loved it here, and we hope to read some more from you. I know you have a new book, and we'll be talking about that as well. Now, you just said, and you also wrote, I think, about the fact that you read a lot under the influence of your family, who shaped somehow this relationship you have with books as a child. You've mentioned a few of your favorite authors as a child, authors of children's literature, and I was wondering, who are your favorite authors for children now? Did they stay the same? Did it change?
Like all, you know, like everybody else of the last 30 years or whatever, 20 years it's been, the Harry Potter series has been really great. You know, there was a series, I'm now blanking on the name of any of the books, The Laughing Skull, and now that you're asking me this, I can't remember it's about kids in London who are solving paranormal, like they're spirits, and they're the ghost hunters. Oh my gosh, I'll have to send you the.
So it's all kinds of books and all kinds of domains of children's literature.
Yeah, you know, when it comes to, I tend to read like adult science fiction, I guess, and then children's books, you know, that have more heart to them, like My Name is Ivan, or The One and Only Bob, you know,
yes,
Applegate, and other books like that have one thing I really love about children's literature is the kind of purity isn't exactly the right word, but there's a heart to them, that because you're talking about things that are, you know, in adolescence, and so, you know, formative, right, things, your first experience with your friends, you know, leaving you, or, you know, a fight with a best friend, or your parents and difficulties there, that are a little bit simpler and more
genuine somehow.
Yeah. Then, like, when you get into adult literature, it's much more complicated and shades of, you know, which is great in its way. But I think this is why a lot of adults like to read, you know, the middle grade juvenile stuff, because they have these stories that resonate for a part of us that is still, you know, 12 years old or whatever. And those, I think, are the stories that I really enjoy.
What is your favorite moment of Michael Prasad's adventure?
My favorite moment?
Yes.
Well, there are two. In terms of like the adventure and the science and stuff like that, I love the bit where he figures out that he can take off his helmet because the pressure in this space is rising, because water is rising, and like there's a confined space, and so the pressure there is high enough, and then he can fit through that part. I don't know. I love that situation, and then I love the part when his father. I guess I'm going to give away the end of the book, but at the very end, his father finds him. And, you know, part of the story for me is that a big part of the story is that relationship with his father, exactly. Right? And like the feeling of like alienation, I guess, or that his father doesn't really, you know, care about him as much as he feels, you know, and you kind of hopefully know that he's mistaken. This is true for a lot of these stories. You kind of see where the protagonist is misunderstanding something, or, you know, going, you know, they're seeing things from, and you want to say like, no, that's not really true, but that's kind of what drives the book. Poor decisions, you know, any story is decisions that sometimes the reader would say, no, don't do that if I could tell you, but those poor decisions are what make the story, you know, get them into trouble or whatever it is. And so when that finally resolves and you kind of see Michael realize the same thing, that means a lot to me, I guess.
I'm very glad you've mentioned that, because I read your book as one also about the fact that family issues actually stay the same wherever you are on Earth or on Mars or wherever. There are tensions, there are misunderstandings, there are difficulties between parents and children, and we just have to handle them. Was that your intention as well? I mean, to write a book about bettering, in a way, our communication skills within families?
Yeah, that was part of the idea. You know, when I one of the things I like about science fiction in general is thinking about how things will be different, right? We'll live in dome cities on Mars someday, right? Yeah. But it's really interesting to think about how things will be the same in that environment, right? So, you know, an example, the idea of like the suit test that he has to take at the very beginning, one of my thoughts was, you know, it's analogous to like getting your driver's license, you know, here on Earth, right? You know, you have to take a test and everybody wants to do it, but like some people, you know, whatever. Or, you know, having a best friend or having your, you know, your father be gone a lot of the time, or, you know, these sorts of things. And yeah, that sort of stuff is really key for me. It's not, I really want there to be some, you know, an emotional core to the story. I feel like adventure and science are great things for the head, you know, like, you know, you might say, oh, that's cool, you know, it's exciting and all that sort of stuff. But my favorite books are always the ones where, honestly, at the end, I cry or tear up, right? Like if I have that reaction, whether it's sad or happy or whatever it is, you have that sort of emotional reaction to it. That to me is, you know, sort of the thing I look for in a lot of these stories, right? And so these, like we were saying earlier, this is things that are, you know, kind of timeless and will be the same even in the future. Your relationship with your parents or your best friend or things like this. And I think it's really important to be able to present these things as being something familiar that you can relate to, right?
Yes, I totally love that, and you totally got that right. It's a book about loss and human frailty and love in the end, and it's definitely fueled by a lot of emotion. So I don't want to spoil things for the readers who haven't read it, but you're in for a big adventure and surprise, emotionally speaking, as well. Now, you are a father of 3. How does that influence your writing?
Well, like I said, it inspired it. It also made it possible. What I found is, I studied creative writing in college, and then for 10 plus years, I had all the time in the world, relatively speaking, because I didn't have kids, and I hardly did any writing whatsoever. Because it's always like, oh, I could do that tomorrow.
Do that later.
Time, right? And then I had twin boys, and my free time narrowed to like, you know, this much time, right? And like I literally had an hour a day that I could, you know, figure, you know, and all the rest of my time was pretty regiment, you know, like when the kids wake up, you're doing this and then work and then they come home, you know, and it's busy. But it became easier for me to have discipline for writing when I had to have all this discipline for everything else. And I had that 1 hour. So I started getting up, you know, an hour before my kids would and writing then. And that's how I got through, you know, all those drafts was, you know, about an hour a day before they woke up, which I never would have done as a, you know, 25-year-old kid living with roommates, right? I mean, that was not going to be my thing. But once I had kids, somehow that became possible. And then, you know, I was also writing short stories then, you know, because writing a novel is a big thing. And I noticed after a while that all of them had either a father or kids, you know, some sort of like parent-child relationship in them. I had like 4 different stories that I wrote then. And they all had similar themes. And, you know, that was part of when I started thinking about, well, maybe, you know, children's literature or this sort of feeling is, you know, like there's a reason I'm gravitating towards it. And I think even though my kids were just babies then, you know, they're now 12 years old almost, and they're, you know, sort of the right age for these books. But something about, I guess, just being a father, you know, made me think about a lot of the, you know, the feelings here, right? And remember my own childhood. And I think that's a lot of the reason why that relationship is there in the book, because me being a new father at the time when I started writing the story, you know, I kind of identified with Michael's father in a lot of ways, or I could imagine how, you know, I could sort of see both sides of that relationship in a way that when I was a kid, all I saw was, you know, here's how I feel. And my father is, you know, I couldn't relate to him in the same way that I could once I had my own children.
It's one of the things I also loved about the book, the credibility of it all, of the relationship that actually works. It's a real life relationship that you can just feel happening there in the pages. Do your kids share your fascination, your passion for Mars?
They like, I wouldn't say they have the same fascination and passion. They love video games and, you know, lots of
they
other,
all, yes.
yeah, but they, you know, they love this stuff in general. They sort of tease me when I bring up random facts about some science thing or try to explain, you know, oh, well, the reason why, you know, your soda goes flat when you don't have very much in the container is because of the air pressure and the stuff like that. And they're, you know, they're interested, though they also have that sort of, maybe not roll their eyes, but like, oh, that's dad again talking about, you know, physics or whatever. But they like, you know, I think in general, they like learning, they like, you know, new and interesting things. They have the same sense of, oh, that's something neat to explore or find out about and all of that.
What is the hardest part of writing for children, or let's say for a younger audience?
Yeah, is not having your characters sound like adults. That's really difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is that to some degree, they always do, even in good books. I mean, if you think about some of the stories we love, not just the voice, sorry, it should always be authentic, but in a sense, we like characters who are heroic, right? In the same way that like an adult character would make decisions that we wouldn't make as an adult. You know, they're more brave, they're more willing to take on something or whatever it is. The kids we read and write about do things that are unusual for kids some way, whether it's, you know, being on Mars and doing something like that, or just confronting a bully, or, you know what I mean, interpersonal sorts of things. And in some ways that, you know, that can come across as being too grown up, right? So you have to find a way to make it so that they are, you know, they have these somewhat larger than life characteristics, you know, whatever their bravery or their strength is, right? Without making it seem too ridiculous or grown up, right? Like they know everything about the world, you know, like an adult would. That's not going to come across right, but they need to have often a strength that is beyond their years, right? So you kind of have to balance that stuff and make it so that they are relatable and they feel like children, you know, despite their whatever their abilities or their strengths is. And that's difficult to do as an adult because it's so easy just to write, you know, grown-up sounding characters. My agent and my editor had a fair amount of feedback where they're like, look, Chris, in this spot right here, they just sound like, you know, 45-year-old Chris Swiedler, not, you know, 12-year-old Michael Prasad. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. That's just, you know, my voice getting in there.
Now, my favorite character, one of my favorite characters in your book is Randall, who is also a father figure. He's a mentor and he functions that way. And I was very curious, who is yours? Do you have favorite characters in your book?
I guess I can't really say I have favorites. It's similar to with my own children. I couldn't possibly say that I have a favorite. You know, Michael is unsurprisingly a lot like me, certainly not identical, but, you know, he's very analytic and all that. Lilith, his friend, is a lot like my wife. She is very down to earth, a really strong emotional intelligence, understands things and people. You know, she's smart, but not in the same, like, go off and think about, you know, physics or whatever for hours at a time, you know? And so in a sense, I'm kind of, you know, I love Lilith in the same way that I, you know, love my wife, right? It's a similar sort of thing. And yes, Randall is a great, you know, he was a sort of character that was easy to write, sometimes a voice. You know, I don't think I can say that he's just like any person in my life. Like I can sort of say Lilith is similar to my wife. But sometimes just the voice that you hear in your head for a character, like everything flows from that. Like I was saying earlier that some parts of writing are just really tedious. With some characters especially, it's really easy. I could always find myself, you know, like his words always flowed really hard. What's unusual, I think, is that the protagonist is the hard one to get for me, right? Maybe it's, you know, I guess it's the most important, or it's, in this case, it was the most similar to me. And sometimes it's hard to, like, even if you understand yourself, it's different than you might see somebody else and be able to, you know, describe them. But Randall was really, really easy for me to write. I do have, one thing I can tell you is that I know in a bit we'll talk about my second book. Randall is in it as kind of a, as a Easter egg type character, in the sense that they're not explicitly tied together, but he shows up in the other book as a character who is, his part is a little bit smaller, but he's also a mentor to the main characters in that story.
That's very good news for me. So please tell us more about the second book.
Yeah, so it's called The Orpheus Plot. I actually have an advanced reader. Oh, is it gonna like really show up there? Sort of being by the background. So it's more, as you can see from the cover, it's about more about space. It's sort of it's a lot of the same idea or setting. It's the story. See how I can describe it. It's about a kid who grew up in the asteroid belt, who like literally grew up in space. And he wants to join the Navy that kind of patrols the asteroid belt, right? But the Navy, just because of history, is all people from Earth or Mars. They've never had anybody who grew up in the asteroid belt in the Navy. And because the Navy's job is to kind of patrol the miners and everybody who are in the belt, there's a lot of animosity between the people in the asteroid belt and the Navy that is like, boarding their ships sometimes or doing stuff like that. And so he joins the school, which is on a ship for kids who want to be in the Navy. And so he's very different from all the other kids who come from Earth or Mars or the moon. They are learning for the first time what it's like to be in space, right? He knows all of that because he's literally grown up there, right? He finds all that stuff really easy. He can fly ships. He knows how to move around in zero gravity, but he doesn't understand all the things that they know, either the same sort of academic background or just cultural stuff or whatever. He's the only person. He's from the asteroid belt. He's the first one in the history of the Navy to join that way. And so it's it's kind of a school story in some ways, right? He's at the school. It's Dragon Singer by Anne McCaffrey. You at least know the series, right? Dragon Singer was one of my favorite books when I was growing up. It's about the main character goes to a school. It's set on Anne McCaffrey's Pern world with dragons and all that sort of stuff. But she goes to this music school, and I read that book like umpteen times when I was a kid. And so there's a lot of influence there. Sort of the character being an outsider at a school where everybody else seems to know what's going on, and she or he in the book don't really, have the same shared background. And so then, there's a lot of conflict and intrigue and all that sort of stuff. It's called The Orpheus Plot. So, you sort of get an idea that there's something more going on than just the school.
I'm very much looking forward to reading it now. And I love the fact that the books communicate somehow. Actually, It's like you said before, the books we read as children shape us as grown-ups in a way. So we stay with them and they stay with us up to a certain point, maybe for our entire life. Now, this motive of the perilous journey, which appears in the Red and also in the Orpheus Plot, as you've mentioned. Now, there's this perilous journey at the end of which we discover courage and the fact that we go through change and we emerge as different people, different beings. And I was wondering, what was your most interesting discovery so far in your journey as a writer?
In my journey as a writer, my most interesting discovery. I think the thing that's been most important for me to learn and has been the most helpful to me is that it doesn't really matter how accomplished you are at something at any one point. It matters whether you're getting better. This applies to a million other things than just writing. I think the thing that kind of sustained me through a lot of early drafts was the feeling that, okay, well, at least this one was better than the last one. And, and when you can see that yourself, right, then you're growing as, in terms of appreciating what makes a story better or whatever it is you're trying to learn. And so being able to have that feeling of, I don't know kind of how close, some years ago, I wouldn't know how close a book was, a draft was to publishing, right? It's very hard to to gauge that, right? You can talk to people in the industry or people read it, but it's very hard. And so it's hard to know in an absolute way how much you're learning, but you kind of know that if you're always getting better, whether it's 2 years or 20 years, if you can sustain that, you'll get to a point where you are whatever your goal is. And that I think is something that's really important to sustain anybody who's learning something. You need to have that feeling of accomplishment, and it's very easy to get frustrated by, like, say you're learning a musical instrument. Oh, I can't play this, this piece yet. It's too difficult for me. Like, I'm not as good as my friend over there, or whatever it is. But if you can focus on your own, on your own progress, it'll always sustain you. There's a quote that I really love. I don't remember who said it, but I use it a lot, which is that, it was a writer who said, whenever he's asked, what is my favorite book I've written? The answer is the one I'm working on now, which is both a really good way of trying to look at your writing or whatever it is you're doing, but also really important, because if it's not true, then why are you writing it? In a sense, right? Not only should you be, growing as you do this, but if you're not excited about it as being, this is the best thing I've done, or in some way, right? This is something that I am proud of and excited about. Like, that's the thing that makes you keep doing it. And again, it's kind of relative to what you've done before. If I sat there and compared myself to famous authors and said, oh gosh, I can't, have descriptions that are as vibrant as this author, or, my characters don't have the same resonance as the characters that I love from this story or that story, I'd probably just give up, right? But if I am excited about what I'm doing next, that's what helps me, keep going.
I totally love this. So it's a process, it's a journey in the end for the writer and for the reader as well, I would say.
Yeah.
Well, and this brings me to my last question. Now, the final paragraphs of In the Red are meant for the child who will soon enough, we hope, or step on Mars and message us all from there. And we're all going to applaud, and be happy that life on Earth too has changed because this has happened. How do you relate to that moment?
Oh, I love the thought. Sometimes I'm a little bit sad that, I'm not of the generation that will grow up to do that. Not that I really ever expected to be an astronaut landing on the moon or Mars or whatever, but I think it will be younger people than me, right, that do that. I think of it as like, people of my parents' generation always say they remember exactly where they were when people landed on the moon, or when John F. Kennedy was shot here in the US. And I really think that's how it will be when people walk on Mars for the first time. It will just be like a momentous point in human history. And it will, I hope, bring us all together, right? Whether it's somebody from the United States or, Russia or China or anywhere, right? It ought to be something that brings us all together. And it's so much fun seeing the stuff that, for example, the recent landing, Perseverance, and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the excitement of everybody, and, all the stuff that happens there. This is the real world steps towards the things that I imagine, and I can only be awed by the work of real scientists and real engineers who actually make things work, compared to my job, which is to just sometimes make up things like, oh, a magic magnetic field, or giant transparent domes that we couldn't possibly build now. The work of really doing that stuff is, I think, heroic, and and really changing the world as we grow and technology advances and stuff like that, and improve everything for everybody. So it's really fun to see all that as we take these steps.
Well, there's definitely water there, as they tell us, but but I think it's your job that keeps us dreaming and hoping and building those machines. So thank you so much for this book and for a wonderful conversation tonight.
Thank you. It's been so much fun.
Indeed, it's been. Thank you so much. Sunt Ioana Buldea Constantinescu, am fost într-o întâlnire în direct cu Christopher Swiedler, autorul volumului În roșu, marțian, volum pe care îl puteți cumpăra de pe paginile de Facebook, de pe site-ul editurii Corint, de pe pagina de Facebook și din librăriile partenere. Vă mulțumesc foarte mult că ați fost cu noi în seara aceasta.